morning. My name is Erin Canine. I work with the Office of Public School Construction. I've been here since about 2005 and have been responsible for the charter school facilities program since about 2011. Today, I will be presenting on the charter school facilities program 2022 filing round. I do want to mention that there is a slight schedule change just in case you did not receive the email that went out to the people that had signed up or seen the edited flyer. This presentation was originally scheduled to go from 9 to 10:30 with a 30-minute break and then a training on how to complete and submit an application to follow. That second training is going to be scheduled in the near future. We're not going to be offering that one today, so we will be scheduling a separate webinar for that. And because of that, we are going to go ahead and extend this presentation until 11. So this will go from 9 to 11. Hopefully that'll ensure we have plenty of time to discuss questions at the end, and then there will not be a break. It'll just conclude at that point. Next slide, please. So today's presentation will start off with OPSC. We will then hear from Michael Pack with CSFA, that's the California School Finance Authority. And then we will follow up with Angel Dowdy with the California Department of Education. As Barbara mentioned, we will have our question and answer session at the end of all of the presentations. So we won't be doing them during the presentations. That way we can make sure we have enough time for all of them. Next slide, please. So the Charter School Facilities Program currently has $96 million available for new applications. This amount was as of the February 2022 State Allocation Board. This funding can be used on new construction and rehabilitation projects. A new construction project will add capacity to a site. A rehabilitation project will modernize existing facilities. Now, these existing facilities need to be district owned and they need to be at least 15 years old. And by modernization, we mean your traditional modernizing an existing building, but also like-kind replacement. That could be where you are demolishing a building and building back in its place. And by like-kind, we mean you demolish and build back the same amount of square foot or the same amount of classrooms. This is a 50-50 program, so we will calculate a total project cost for your project based on grants and regulation and what we are allowed to provide. 50% of that total project cost will be a state grant that you do not need to pay back. And then the other 50% will be an applicant match. That match can be a cash contribution, or it can be a loan, or it can be a combination of the two. We do provide the opportunity for applicants to access advanced funding for design costs and site acquisition if your project includes that. And that funding, along with your final construction funding, is requested and released through our priority funding process. There's more information about that on our website, but it basically is generally funded from spring and fall bond sales. Next slide. Eligible applicants to the program can either be the charter school themselves, or the local school district can submit the application for the charter school. If a district is going to submit for a charter school, it must be the district where the project is physically located and that serves the same grade level that will be housed in the charter project. So this may be a different district than the authorizing district. The applicant will be the one that receives the funding. They will sign the grant agreement, which is a school facilities program requirement to receiving funds. They will sign all applications. If a loan is requested, they'll repay that loan. They'll be responsible for basically ensuring all of the certifications to our forms are met and that the project is compliant with those program certifications. So in essence, they're responsible for the project. Next slide, please. Eligible charters to the program need to provide classroom-based instruction. This is defined in Ed Code. They can be autonomous or non-autonomous. However, if it is a autonomous charter, the district does need to be the applicant. The charter petition needs to be approved prior to the application submittal. This is your initial charter petition. If you have a petition renewal, that could happen after your application submittal, but your initial charter must be approved prior to submitting an application. And you need to have 2 years operating or administrative experience in California. Next slide, please. For rehabilitation projects, the district has to hold title to the facilities and the site, but for new construction projects, there are 3 different opportunities for entities to hold title. The local school district can hold title. Again, just like with being the applicant, this would be the district where the project is physically located and that serves the same grade level as the project. A local governmental entity can hold title, or the charter school can request to hold title. If the charter school holds title, there will be a lien recorded on the title for the total amount of funds received from the state. So this would include the state grant and any lien if requested. There are also additional security requirements that allow a charter school to hold title, and those are spelled out in education code. Again, this is only for new construction projects. As to qualify as a rehabilitation project, the district owns the facility and sites. Program requirements are that you will need to receive Division of the State Architect and California Department of Education final plan approval for any project funded. If you're buying a site, you will also need to get final site approval from CDE. You will need to follow the competitive bid process when selecting your design professional, and you will need to make sure that all requirements in public contract code and labor code are met. All of these items you certify to on your applications for funding. At this point, it would be the Form SAB 5009. Down the road, if you are successful and receive a preliminary apportionment, you'll be certifying to everything on the Form SAB 5004. I advise you to look at these applications and see the certifications so you know what you are certifying you're going to make sure your project is compliant with. And you also need to be found financially sound by the California School Finance Authority. Next slide. So at this point, if you submit an application during this round, what you're applying for is a preliminary apportionment. This is a reservation of bond authority that is based on proposed costs. So you do not have to have designs, plans, you don't have to have anything like that. We're going to determine these proposed costs at this point based on a project narrative, just a written narrative, and that Form SAB 5009. This reservation and bond authority then allows you to go forward and design your project knowing that that bond authority is going to be there for you when you complete that process. This preliminary apportionment then will need to be converted to a final apportionment within 4 years. And there is a one-time 1-year extension you can request to that 4 years. By conversion, all we mean is you submit a Form SAB 5004, which is an application for funding, and have your final DSA and CDE plan approval. If you're buying a site, you would also have your CDE final site approval and have at least entered into escrow. But by conversion, you do not have to have the project built or even have started construction. Next slide. So calculating the preliminary apportionment is made up of grants. So we have grants that we are allowed to provide in regulation. Both rehabilitation and new construction projects will start out with a base grant that is calculated based on either the number of classrooms and grade level of classrooms in a new construction project or the eligible square footage in a rehabilitation project. We then add on to those base grants supplemental grants. These are additional grants that projects can qualify for. Some are just for new construction, such as site development, site acquisition, and multi-level construction, and some are only for rehab, such as elevators. But others can go to both projects and depend on project size, location of the project, and site size. Then on top of those grants, we apply an inflator factor. The inflator factor is a little bubble of bond authority that will account for a project that may take those full 4 years to convert, and will need to account for costs increases in construction costs over those 4 years. Next slide. So the new construction base grant, as I mentioned, is calculated based on the number of classrooms in a project. So to calculate it, you would figure out how many classrooms you're going to build, figure out the grade level of those classrooms using the parameters we have here. So K through 6, 7 through 8, 9 through 12, non-severe or severe. Then you would multiply the loading standard by each classroom. And this is an SFP loading standard. This isn't necessarily your actual loading standard, by that grade's pupil grant. And then if you have multiple grades, you would add all of those up, and that would be your new construction base grant. This dollar amount that's in this middle column is the current 2022 pupil grant. And this gets adjusted every year for increases in construction costs. Next slide. The rehabilitation base grant is very similar. However, it is 2 steps. The first thing you do for the rehabilitation base grant is you multiply the eligible square footage in the project by the 2022 grant amount. And there's 2 grants. There's a grant for toilet square footage, and then there's a grant for everything else. You'll add those 2 together, and that is step 1 of the rehabilitation base grant. The next step is you are going to calculate what the new construction base grant would be if this was a new construction project. And you would follow the steps on the previous screen by determining how many classrooms are being rehabilitated, multiply them by the appropriate loading standard and the appropriate pupil grant for that grade. What the rehabilitation base grant is going to be is the lesser of these 2 grant amounts, these 2 calculations. So the square footage that is requested when you come in and apply for a rehabilitation base grant, as well as the pupil grants that are requested when you apply for a new construction project, those cannot be increased when you convert. So this is going to be a number you're going to want to make sure you think about and know what you're going to need at this point. You can always decrease. So if you decide to do a slightly smaller project and maybe not build as many classrooms or not rehabilitate as much square footage, you can always reduce your square footage and pupil grants. You just cannot increase them when you come in to convert. Next slide. So getting started after you finish watching this presentation, if this sounds like a program that will work for your needs and you are interested in applying, so there are some things you can get started on right away. So that way you can make sure you're ready to submit an application once we start accepting them. If you do not already have an approved charter petition, that would be the first step, because as I mentioned, you have to have an approved charter petition prior to submitting an application. The next thing you can do is schedule your board to approve a school board resolution. This resolution is going to support the submittal of the application. It will state who are the charter representatives and who can sign the applications. You're going to need to provide this date on your form SAB 5009, and you can actually see that section on the form if you want to kind of have an idea of how that should be phrased. We don't provide a template for these resolutions. This is a local resolution, local language, but that particular certification section does provide a good starting point. And then you will need this certification, this resolution, so that we can see, okay, who did the charter school approve as their charter representative? We will need this down the road to create an OPSC online account for that representative so they can submit their application. There'll be a lot more information on that in the upcoming webinar where we go over how to submit an application. Districts most likely may already have this resolution date if they are active in our program and submitting applications. I do just want to point out that the charter school program came into existence in 2002. So if a district has a resolution date prior to that, say 2099, they would need to have an updated resolution that basically says they can submit an application to the charter program. Next, you'll want to determine your project needs. You'll want to think about what you're going to want to do. Are you going to be submitting a new construction project, a rehabilitation project, or maybe a combination of both? You're going to modernize some district facilities, but also add some capacity to the site. That would be 2 applications that you would submit, one for new construction and one for rehabilitation. I do want to point out that one of the things you certify to on the 5009 is that the charter school and the district did consider existing facilities. So that is something you'll want to do is at least go have that consideration with the district so you can certify that on your form. And then you can also start working with CDE on a preliminary recommended site size letter. All applications will need this letter, and you can go ahead and start that process once you know what your project is going to include. Next slide. So for charters that are going to be submitting an application on their own, so this slide would not apply to districts that are going to be applying. The other thing you can do is get your notification ready for your district. If a charter is applying independently, they must notify the district that they will be applying 30 days before they can submit an application to OPSC. Again, as with all other district involved situations, this is the district where the project is physically located and that serves the same grade level as the charter project. You will submit evidence of the date that the notification was received by the district with your application. So this is not the date that the letter was dated or mailed out. It's the date that the district receives it. May 4th is the last day a district can receive a notification, and an applicant, a charter, can still submit an application by the deadline. And again, it's really key to keep in mind that it's the date, May 4th is the last day for a district to physically receive it. So you're going to have evidence they received it on that day, not necessarily the date that it was mailed out. Next slide. For new construction projects, your notice to the district is going to request them to update their new construction eligibility and provide an unhoused pupil certification. They need to provide their methodology for determining that certification, and this must be discussed at a regularly scheduled public meeting. For her rehabilitation project, you're going to be requesting them to get into an agreement with you. So the agreement is going to be between the charter school and the district, and it's going to be for the use of the facilities to be rehabilitated. Next slide. We have sample notification letters on our website for you to use. And you can just fill in your specific charter, district, and project information. This is what the letter looks like for new construction. Next slide. And this is what it looks like for rehabilitation. So both letters are requesting the district to do all of the steps that I outlined in the previous slide. Next slide. So a complete application needs to consist of several items. We have a checklist on our website. It's pictured here. Next slide. And this checklist includes the application for charter school preliminary apportionment, one copy of your current approved charter petition, the CDE preliminary recommended site size letter, a narrative description of the proposed project. Regulations, school facility program regulations have requirements on information that does need to be in this narrative. So make sure you're referring to that regulation section when you write it. Verification of nonprofit status, if applicable. Verification of the notification to the school district. That would be charter applicants only. Districts don't need to provide that. And again, it's verification of when the notification was received. And then financial soundness review documents that would go directly to CSFA. So these are items that, regardless of your application type, you're going to need to submit. Next slide. Then for new construction applications, if the application is submitted by the charter, you will eventually submit the form SAB 5001. This will generally actually come from the district. The charter doesn't necessarily have to be the one submitting this. The district usually submits this directly to us. The district unhoused pupil certification with the board resolution. Again, remember, this is the charter school applying independently. If the district is the applicant, they would just write this on the application. And then the methodology for determining that certification. And remember, again, it does need to be discussed and approved by the district board. Now, key for these items is we need to have all of these for an application to be processed and considered complete. However, we will accept a charter application without these items because it does take time for the district to update their eligibility, have that board meeting. So the charter school can go ahead and submit their application without these items, and then the district can follow up with us and submit those items to us once they are ready. Next slide. Then for new construction projects that include site acquisition, we would also need either a preliminary appraisal or a median cost valuation. These are the two items we can use to determine how much funding to set aside for site acquisition. Both of these need to meet their specific requirements in regulation. A key item to the appraisal is that the valuation date in the appraisal needs to be within 6 months of the date that the application is received by OPSC. Next slide. So then some items that you'll submit for your rehabilitation application, and this is for everybody, regardless of who the applicant is, the first two. You're going to submit a site diagram and a square footage spreadsheet. The site diagram is going to show the entire site and indicate what facilities are included in the rehabilitation application. You're going to want to show dimensions of the facilities that are included, and you're going to want to make sure that you highlight the classroom and toilet area on that map. These don't have to necessarily be extremely fancy site diagrams. Sometimes applicants in the past have used their fire maps and submitted those, and you can, hand write in your dimensions on there, but just something so we can easily see and identify, okay, these are the facilities that are in the project, and we can count all the classrooms and match it up to what you're saying is on the application, and we can figure out the dimensions looking at that site diagram. Then to support that diagram, you'll go ahead and submit a spreadsheet that has all of those dimensions in there, broken up by non-toilet and toilet, and then the totals would basically match your application. If you are applying on your own, so that the charter school is the applicant, then we also need that rehabilitation agreement. And that rehabilitation agreement needs to be approved prior to submitting the 5009. This is important because it's slightly different than new construction, where you notify the district and then you can submit your application, and the district's eligibility documents, unhoused pupil certification and methodology can come in afterwards. This one is not like that. You need to make sure that that rehabilitation agreement is approved and dated prior to the date that you submit the 5009. If it happens afterwards, then that application isn't valid. And again, that agreement is only if the charter school is applying independently. Next slide. So applications can be submitted in two formats. The preferred way to submit an application will be using our OPSC online application submittal form or process. We will have a step-by-step training in the near future on how to log in, fill out an application, and submit that. If for some reason you're having troubles with that and you're not able to submit online, then the second preference would be to have application packages emailed to our office. Next slide. Applications can be submitted beginning May 2nd and ending on June 3rd. The date that they are received does not determine funding, but it's really important to know that it can be used in a tiebreaker. Going off of my experience with past rounds, most applications are going to come in on June 3rd or maybe June 2nd. And there'll be a couple that straggle in the beginning. And it's going to be so important if we are looking at our list and putting everyone in order of funding, that if you get tied with somebody, if you came in early, that could have been the tiebreaker and you could have gotten funded if you had just, gotten your application a little bit earlier. So it's so important to really try and get the application in earlier if a tie does happen. We have to receive all complete valid applications by 11:59 p.m. on June 3rd. We can receive them until 11:59 because it's either going to be submitted online or emailed. Anything received after that, we cannot accept. Next slide. So if our program is oversubscribed, and we anticipate that it will be, we have not had a round yet where we did not receive more applications than we had funding available. We will use the preference points and funding matrix process that is provided for in regulation. We basically will assign preference points to all of the applications that come in. There are 4 possible categories for a total of 160 points. The first one is for new construction projects. If you're located in an overcrowded district and the district certifies that your project will be housing their unhoused students, so you relieve their overcrowding, you can receive up to 40 points. All projects, regardless of new construction or rehabilitation, can receive up to 40 points for free and reduced lunch percentages. You can use the highest of either the district, the charter school, or any other public school that is located within 3 miles of the charter school. And if you're using another public school, it does not need to be the same grade level as the charter school. And then all rehab projects receive 40 points. And then any project, regardless of rehab or new construction, receives 40 points if it is if the entity operating the charter school is nonprofit. It's really important to keep that in mind, that it's the entity operating the charter school. It's not, let's say, a certain division of the charter school that maybe is organized nonprofit for fundraising purposes. The entity operating the charter school, and there's only 2 ways that it can be organized that will meet our requirements for nonprofit. And that is either under the Internal Revenue Code section 501c3 or state corporations. So I know a lot of districts are considered nonprofit, but the way that they are organized don't meet these 2 qualifications. One last thing I want to point out, if you are submitting a combination application, so that means a rehab and new construction application, so it's really one project, but you're submitting 2 applications because they're funded differently, they will get the points together. So if you get points for rehab, the new construction project will also get those rehab points. And if the new construction project gets points for relieving overcrowding, the rehab project will also get those points. Next slide. Once we assign preference points, we don't just fund for the highest points down. We put them through a funding matrix, and we fund projects in order with the most preference points, but within each category. So these categories are geographical regions of the state, whether the project is urban, rural, or suburban, large, medium, and small charter schools, and then the grade level of the charter school. And that would be K through 6, 7 through 8, or 9 through 12. The grade level is determined based off of the highest grade level that the charter is approved to serve in the petition. So if you're approved to serve grade 12, you would be a 912 project for purposes of this funding matrix, even if, let's say, you're only building classrooms through 9th grade or 8th grade. These categories are defined in regulation, so you can see based on, let's say, the county you're located in, that's how we determine your geographical region, and then how to determine whether you're urban, rural, suburban, and your project size as well. We do have a handout on our webpage. Next slide. that gives an example of how this works and provides some more information on these funding matrices. And this is what it looks like right here. And you can also access that on our website. Next slide. So just to wrap up, some important links for you with some really good information. The wording highlighted in red does have a link. So once this is uploaded, if you click on that, it will take you to this page. The charter page on the OPSC website, it's called Access Charter School Facilities Funding, has the district notification samples, the funding matrix outline, the application submittal checklist. If you end up needing to submit your application package by email, it has a link to that app. It will also have a link to the online application, and it also has a link to information on the priority funding process. That's what I mentioned in the very beginning, how we fund projects. There's a link to the SFP approved regulations, and I provided the sections for charter, as well as our handbook and the education code, the CSFP education code. That's Article 12, so you can see what's required in statute. And then lastly, a link to the California Public School construction process. Next slide. Any questions about anything that was presented today or about your project? If you have questions about whether or not you qualify, if the project you're considering is something that would be eligible, if you get to the point where you're submitting an application and you need help logging on, filling out the application, submitting it, you will contact me and I will be able to answer those questions for you, but also walk you through that process. And next slide. Now I'm going to go ahead and hand it on over to Michael Pack with CSFA.
Good morning. Thank you, Erin. Can you hear me okay? Great.
Yes.
So my name is Michael Pack. I am the lead analyst on the CSFP project or program for CSFA. And this morning, some of what I've got prepared is going to recap what Erin already mentioned. And then we'll move on to some more specific CSFA elements. So for a brief overview of the program, as Erin already mentioned, we're going to skip that. We can skip that slide. Yeah, Erin already covered all of this. That was wonderful. Thank you. Next slide. Okay. So CSFA's role specifically is to assess the financial soundness of the applicant for the project. We do this anywhere from 1 to 3 times, depending on the structure of the project, how soon after preliminary it may or may not request advanced design and site acquisition funding, and when the project eventually comes back for final apportionment or conversion, as Erin mentioned, we call it. And then the state CSFA's other major role is administering what we refer to as the program agreements on behalf of the state. And the next slide will go into program agreements. So we consider this to include 3 major documents. All of these must be executed prior to any funding being released. So we generally try to get together and get these documents executed after preliminary approval, but it can be done at any point before advance or final approval. So the first and most important program agreement is the Memorandum of Understanding. This is the program memorandum between the state, the school, and if there is a separate obligor other than the school itself for the loan portion, then that party, such as a district or a charter management organization, is also a party to this memorandum. The second major document is the funding agreement. Funding agreement is only used when there is a loan incorporated into the project between the state and the obligor. And then the final document is a facility use agreement, which is the agreement between the charter and their authorizing district that governs the facility that they are going to be constructing or rehabilitating. So the state is not a party to that agreement, but we will request a copy of it for our files. Next slide. So basic eligibility criteria for CSFA for the financial soundness part. We look to see that an authorized charter is in place and that the school has been providing instructional operations for a minimum of 2 years. We look to see, stable financial operations. We like to see sufficient debt service coverage for the amount that is being requested as a loan, if there is a loan involved. We look for any material risks that could threaten the viability of the school in the future. This includes civil or criminal litigation. We have a questionnaire that we request that I'll mention later, where we ask for disclosure of any civil or criminal matters that are going on. We also look into any reporting and oversight being conducted by the authorizer that might indicate whether there's any problems at all with the charter. And then the bulk of our review is related to past, current, and future financial performance. We're going to go more into detail on which documents we request, but broadly, we request things like prior year audits, current and projected budgets, current and projected cash flow, how greatly the school relies on contributions, and then we look at enrollment and average daily attendance trends, and as well as what assumptions are being made about enrollment to sustain future projections. Next slide. We're also going to look at student performance trends just to make sure that the charter is performing comparably to neighboring schools in their district. We look at qualifications of management. Generally, new hires are the ones that we want to understand. We will often request resumes from administrative staff and/or board members. We review to make sure that the charter is in good standing with their authorizer. We will contact the authorizing district, whether or not that district is already involved with the project, just to make sure that they do not have any concerns or questions about the way the charter is being operated. And just a note, our financial soundness determinations can be good for up to 12 months. The duration is determined by the board, and that can determine whether or not a subsequent financial soundness review needs to be conducted again when a project transitions from preliminary to advanced or final apportionment. Next slide. When we present our findings to the CSFA board, some of the things that we incorporate would be the management organization, if one is involved, and the school's background. And we do this in partnership with the applicant school. We will invite representatives from the school or the management organization to come to our board. We love to have them attend and even give a little bit of firsthand presentation about what sort of impact this project that they are pursuing could have for their students and staff. So we like to make our board aware of not only the history of the school, the enrollment information, their board makeup, demographics at the school, and student performance. We review the eligibility determination that we've made. We brief our board on the project's scope and description, which we will get initial information about that from OPSC directly. And then during the course of our review, we always make sure from the applicant school that we have the most up-to-date description of the project. And then finally, of course, we're briefing our board on our financial findings and how confident we are that the project is going to be able to sustain debt service coverage if they are requesting a loan. And if there is no loan, if the matching share of the school is going to be covered by a lump sum, then we like to let our board know where that lump sum is coming from. Is the district providing it out of bond funds, or is there an outside grant of some kind involved? So that would be something that we would also make sure our board understands. Next slide. So to go a little more in depth about the documents we request specifically, CSFA will request when it's time to commence the financial soundness review. So first, we have a basic application form, just includes contact information, name of the school and project. And we are in the process of developing an online application as well. We hope to have the online version live before this filing round commences in May. We have the required legal status questionnaire. I mentioned that earlier. That's just a form that asks the school, and if the district or a management organization are involved, they will also be asked to fill out a legal status questionnaire, disclosing whether or not the parties have any ongoing or in the past civil or criminal litigation. For the overview of the transaction, we want to make sure we understand exactly who the applicant is, which is most often the school, though occasionally a management organization will be the applicant. If there is a loan, the obligor, because the obligor may be the school themselves, or it may be the district or a management organization. The structure of these projects is flexible, and that's why each one is treated as an individual case when we're conducting these reviews. And then which party is going to be holding the title. Management organization, if there is one involved, information about the authorizing district, basic description of the project. Next slide. We will also request copies of the most recent charter authorization or renewal. As I mentioned before, we will want to look at resumes for any new key staff that may have been added recently to the school or the school's governing board. List of other current board members, copies of any reports, oversight or due diligence kind of reports that may be executed by the authorizing district, just to make sure, as I said before, that the charter school and the district are working together in harmony, and that the authorizer has no concerns about the school's ongoing performance in the future. Next slide. So for the financial part of the review, this is just a little bit more specific than the previous slides. We are going to request official audited statements for at least the last 3 fiscal years at the time of the review beginning. So the last 3 years. We will want to look at an approved budget for the current fiscal year, as well as projected budgets for up to the next 5 fiscal years. Projected income statements, balance sheets, and cash flows for up to the next 5 years. Current and projected enrollment for the next 5 fiscal years is obviously very important, as for the majority of schools, if not all schools, we could say enrollment numbers determine their budget and what they're going to be able to do. When we request enrollment, we ask that these projections include a breakdown of average daily attendance rates, how many of the students at the school are eligible for free or reduced price meals, how many students are English language learners, and then how many of their projected students are going to be unduplicated pupils, which just means the unduplicated number without overlapping free or reduced price meals or English language learners. We're also going to request historical and projected data for full-time equivalent teachers and staff. We like to look at not only the student to teacher ratio, but also that can play into the budget and the hiring that the school plans to do in the future, how the school hopes to grow. And then any recent borrowing of in the neighborhood of $50,000 or more. This just goes back to any concerns that we might have about the school being able to meet their debt service coverage. We want to make sure that the applicant is going to be stable and sound and is a good investment for the state's portion of the grant. Next slide. So here you have our executive director, Katrina, down in Los Angeles physically, and myself, I'm up in Sacramento. So if anybody didn't know, CSFA has offices in LA and Sacramento, which used to be really nice when we got together in person more often, but most of these processes can be conducted through virtual means now. So if anyone has questions about this, they can email myself. My email is right there, or the program group email box which you can see is just CSFP at treasurer. And that concludes my portion.
Good morning, I'm Angel Dowdy. I'm an education programs consultant with the California Department of Education. I work in the school facilities and transportation division and do a lot of work with charters. Next slide, please. A little bit of background with the CSFP project is that there are some ed codes spelled out here that state that charters must meet the requirements regarding public school construction, including plan approvals, toxic substance review, site selection and site approvals, just like any non-charter project that would be seeking state funding. The second ed code relates to the site selection and site approvals that are seeking reimbursement of state funding. And then the regulations there of Title V covers site approvals and requirements of the school design, both interior and exterior, grounds, parking areas, busing, and pickup and drop off areas. Next slide, please. Charter schools or districts that are applying on behalf of charter schools can apply for that preliminary apportionment. And Aaron's already stated that the applications will be accepted between May 2nd and June 3rd. And these applications are submitted directly through OPSC. Next slide, please. For all new projects, that are either new construction or rehab, the CDE has to provide a recommended acreage letter for preliminary apportionment to the OPSC. So that CDE letter that will state the minimum acreage for a project. If the minimum acreage is below two thresholds, 70% or 50%, some additional requirements to the project would be needed, and you would work with the CDE on that. One thing to remember is that the letter from the CDE must be included in that application to OPSC. So you would have to receive that letter prior to submitting June 3rd. Next slide, please. In order to receive that letter, some information that I would need in order to process that would be the grade configuration of the school, your planned student capacity or your master plan capacity. Would there be student parking if it's a 9-12 school? Does your charter have a physical education program that's listed to the state standards in your approved charter petition? And if you're building multi-story new construction, I would need to know that as well. Next slide, please. So after you receive your preliminary apportionment, there's a couple of processes that need to work. And so you would need your site and plan approvals required from the CDE. And those final approval letters would need to be included with your funding application. Next slide, please. So briefly with the site approval process, charter schools would select potential sites. You would reach out to the CDE to evaluate those 3 potential sites. We would come out, put our feet on the ground, take a look to see if any hazards that are around. We would then provide the charter school with the recommendations, and then the charter school would then identify the preferred site and then prepare all of the studies that are required. Charter schools may then request the early site acquisition funds from OPSC in most cases, and Aaron did discuss that a little bit. And then once you've received that and moved through the studies, the charter would then submit the final components to CDE for final site approval. Next slide, please. Now, site approvals can be happening at the same time that plan approvals are happening. However, a plan may not be approved until the final site approval has been given. So the plan approval process, and this would work also, this would pertain also to modernizations, not just new construction, but the charter school would have to develop their educational specifications that are adopted by the board. The charter school would then submit the preliminary plans and design development to CDE. The charter school would then resolve any CDE concerns and submit DSA ready plans for plan approval, for final approval. Once the charter school receives or has received the final site approval, then the charter school would be able to receive the final plan approval. Next slide, please. There are some resources on the CDE website to help you with these. The school site analysis and development guide can give some pointers on how we calculate our required acreage. School site selection and approval guide would list some of the things that we would be looking for as far as hazards and location. There's some information for local school districts, your local planning agency, and how to work with architects on our website as well. Next slide, please. And here again are some more CDE website resources that would pertain whether we're talking about school site selection, Title V requirements, small school site policy. So if you're underneath that 70 or 50% of the CDE recommended acreage, and then some staff assignments. If you would be working in a particular region, there are 5 field representatives throughout the state, and we would determine if you would be working directly with me or if you'd be working with that the field rep for your particular region. Next slide, please. Here's our website address and information. The best way to get me right now and to request your letter would be to put all the information that's required in order to complete the minimum school site letter and email that to me, and my email is listed there. Next slide, please.
Okay, so that is the presentation portion